Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
Hello, this is John Bicknell, host of the Cognitive Crucible. Just a very fast note before we start today's discussion. This is a special dual release episode of the Cognitive Crucible. Today, we are proud to partner with the U.S. Army's 8th Psychological Operations Group, which hosts the PSYWAR Podcast, designed to help the Army's recruiting efforts into the psychological operations community. Listeners may recall that several episodes ago, we had retired U.S. Army Major General John Davis on the Cognitive Crucible. At the very beginning of that episode, General Davis passes along his advice to the young men and women who are just beginning their military careers on what he calls the front lines of modern warfare. Additionally, listeners may want to listen closely to John's persistent messages relative to the cognitive security fight in which we find ourselves, in that partnerships and collaborations are more important today than they have ever been. So I encourage both PSYWAR and Cognitive Crucible listeners to go back and check out General Davis's episode. And just a little more information about the PSYWAR podcast itself. The podcast is designed to demystify psychological operations and inform soldiers about how they can join the PSYOP Regiment. It also discusses the future of information warfare and sprinkles in some cool war stories on top of all of that. And as always, we will have links to these resources in the show notes. And now on to today's discussion. Today we have two guests. First is Colonel Jeremy Mushtare, who is the commanding officer of the U.S. Army's 8th Psychological Operations Group. During Jeremy's Army career, he has held numerous command and staff positions. His last assignment was at the Pentagon as the Director for Information Operations in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict, also known as SOLIC. And also joining us today is Mr. Austin Branch, who is an information operations pioneer, practitioner, and leader. Austin holds the distinction of being the Army's very first FA-30 information operations officer when that career field was just forming. While in uniform, he served at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels. Since retiring from the Army, Mr. Branch served in several senior executive civilian roles within the Department of Defense, which focused on information operations, cyber, and counterterrorism. Austin is also one of the founding members of the Information Professionals Association, or IPA. Jeremy and Austin, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John.
Hey, John, thank you. Appreciate it.
Gentlemen, today I'd like to cover a broad range of topics related to the information environment, including the PSYOP mission, manpower challenges, and even some current initiatives related to information operations. So Jeremy, I'd like to start with you, and Austin, please feel free to jump in with any follow-on commentary that you think is appropriate. So some Cognitive Crucible audience members, Jeremy, may be unfamiliar with the psychological operations and your PSYOP group in general. Could you give our audience an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So psychological operations has been around for quite some time in our military, really evolving out of World War I and then getting going again in the World War II timeframe. It used to be called psychological warfare. In the 1960s, we changed the term to psychological operations. And really, it only became a branch in the Army in about the 2006 timeframe, so it existed as a functional area before. But we've had units for a number of years going back to the 1950s continuously. We have two active duty groups. We have the 4th PSYOP group, and we have the 8th group that I'm in command of. Both of those active duty groups are here at Fort Bragg. And then we have two reserve component groups, the 7th group, which is out in California, and the 2nd group, which is in Ohio. And so, what is it that psychological operators are responsible for? Really, we're influence professionals. And the main thing that we do is we're looking to target psychological vulnerabilities in adversary audiences. And we're trying to sow fissures, confusion, and doubt in adversary organizations. We do that through a variety of means, sensitive and high tech to low tech to no tech. And we do that using methods from overt to clandestine to deception. So in short, that's kind of what we're responsible for. A very small community. And so it's great to be here to be able to discuss it with you today.
Continuing on, Jeremy, but my understanding is that the PSYWAR podcast is designed at least partially to help with recruiting efforts into the Army's psychological warfare community. Could you outline for us what some of the manpower or HR challenges are in the PSYOP community? For example, could you share some of those challenges and perhaps start with how recruiting into the PSYOP field differs from typical entry-level MOSs or military occupational specialties that many people might think of as typical Army accession runway?
Yeah, John, I think you hit it right there. We're a non-accessions branch. And so what that means is, we need more seasoned folks who come over into the active duty special operations side of things. And so that's going to involve an assessment and selection process. So they have to be in the Army for a certain amount of time as an officer before they can even apply to go to selection. And they'll do a 10-day assessment and selection. And then if they're selected, they'll continue on through the pipeline. And that pipeline for an officer is going to be the Army Special Operations Forces Captain's Career Course at that level. Then it's followed with a 10-week qualification course. And then individuals would be able to go through some additional training afterward, including language training, because all of our folks are going to be regionally aligned, and they're going to be trained in specific languages. On the enlisted side, we've kind of broadened things out. So it used to operate sort of the same way. Now there's a 37 X-ray program where individuals can actually sign up to come in the Army enlisted, and basically go through your basic training, go through AIT out at the MP school, and then come into PSYOP training. So that we've kind of opened the aperture a little bit. And I think part of what you're talking about in terms of recruiting, the PSYWAR podcast and the things we're doing with Fourth Group is really about getting the word out. It's a small community. And by virtue of being non-accessions, we're looking at populations who are already in the military for the most part to try to draw them in. We're looking for individuals who have the aptitude to do what we do, to be able to work with influence methodologies, work with different and emerging technologies. So it's a niche kind of thing in a lot of ways. It's a small community, and what we can do to get the word out would be very helpful.
So the FA 30 designation, that is officer only. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you said that all soldiers who matriculate into the PSYOP community, whether officer or enlisted, have go through a language curriculum if they're not already fluent in another language?
That's correct, on the active side. And then on the reserve side, because they have a lot less time available typically for the training pipeline, they're not regionally aligned in that same sense. But for the active duty folks, they do go through the language training as well. And they do the majority of that right here at Fort Bragg. So the Special Warfare Center and School is the place where the majority of that goes through, unless there's something significantly different in the language training where they might go out to the Defense Language Institute.
Are there any meaningful differences in the FA 30 information operations officer and PSYOPs officers? And this both Jeremy and Austin, you could probably have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would defer to Austin, who's had a foot in both sides here for his expertise.
Yeah, I think there are. Look, the psychological operations officers and enlisted are, spend an enormous amount of training time. They're part of these units and organizations. They deploy, they evolve, they learn, and it's and they have an acute professional experience and training and academic background. and being influence professionals. The information operations side is really, really focused on the integration of a host, being a staff officer to help integrate a host of capabilities. That training is really focused on a broader set of integration, but not as they're not the deep influence professionals. That we got to leave that to the psychological operations community of experts, which of course some psychological operations professionals like myself, also work the information operations portfolio. And you'll see across the combatant commands that you'll see a lot of more senior psychological operations officers and senior NCOs who actually fulfill the roles of information operations coordinators and integrators, because they're so deep in understanding of the influence professional space. So there's a lot of similarities, but the reality is the guys who are truly strictly FA-30s, their role is a staff function focused on the integration of a host of information-related capabilities to provide staff recommendations to a commander. Our psychological operations force, just like Jeremy talked about, are career professionals who focus on those skill sets and capabilities, focused on influence both across the spectrum of engagement. Jeremy, did I get that right?
Yeah, Austin, that was spot on.
So I'm curious, Jeremy, what are some of the other manpower challenges that the PSYOP community faces? Like, for example, after having spent an enlistment or two, is retention a challenge for the more senior or the mid-grade to senior officers and enlisted personnel?
I don't know that the challenges are any different than Big Army has. I think it's more noticeable when you have such a small community, right? And when you put so much effort into the training and expertise of a special operations force soldier like we do, you feel that more when the individual departs prior to, say, 20 years of service or whatever. So I think that's one of the major things here is that it's a small community. It's been that way by design. Typically, for a number of years, we've been in what we would consider be a no growth environment for a number of things in the Army. And you look at what we've done with Army force structure across the whole. So it kind of flatlines, or, we'll retain that zero growth mentality. We've done a number of changes just in the last year to try to better balance what we do in the active force just based on that no growth environment. And that's affected a reorganization across both groups, where 4th group has gone into more of a regional focus, and 8th group has now gone toward a global focus. But again, that's done in a no growth environment that we're in right now. In terms of the recruiting as a whole, again, you're out there competing with lots of other folks for talent. And there really is a war for talent in the Army. You just had the cyber branch stand up not that long ago and things like that. There's a lot of different things out there that the Army's investing in. And then, based on the growth or no growth of the Army as a whole, how are we all competing for that talent?
Hey, John, if I could ask a question as a follow-on to that, and then I'll make a comment and then ask a question. In the last couple of 3-4 years, we've seen real, hyper competition in the information environment. It's been very public. It's not just a military thing. It's across politics, diplomacy, finance. In this, not only the global power competition, great power competition, it's broader to the great power competition in the information environment. We see businesses and industry worry about their reputation and their branding. They worry about cognitive security for their own interests. I can imagine that now that this is so acute, it's such an acute challenge and threat, that more folks are interested in involving themselves in this career field. And Jeremy, to you, I can imagine that there's opportunities to work with the private sector, not the defense industry private sector, but the other private sector that has capability in this space, is actually doing things to help their own business interests that have that might be able to provide some value, or certainly some partnerships or for global security or national security. Would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And the way that things are going with the evolutions, the fast evolutions that are taking place in the information environment, for us to keep pace, we have to draw closer and closer to those industries. And that's certainly what we're seeing. And that's something we have to get better at, and then hopefully draw people from those same industries to come and join our ranks. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Austin.
All right, fantastic, guys. I'd like to pose this question to both of you and have a discussion around some of the initiatives that you're involved in, or initiatives that you may be aware of that would be interesting to bring up in this forum. Austin, could we start with you as far as some of the information environment related initiatives that you're aware of?
Well, some of the areas that I'm talking to other senior leaders about, it goes to the earlier points that we made about involving folks outside of the Department of the Defense to not only understand capability and their methods and applications, but it's also, how do you appropriately partner or if inspire or team with private organizations or others that have interest in the same, have shared interest in the common outcomes. How do we optimize those relationships to get everyone in the game? Because as Jeremy may attest, the competitive information environment from a national security and global security requires an all-in proposition. DoD and the Army and the psychological operations community more specifically has a huge contribution to make, but it is a contribution to a mosaic of capabilities and efforts. So the ability of DoD to and more specifically our psychological operations professionals to network with these others and be part and in helping orient a network of networks is, I think, really, really important. They also have the power to convene. And I've talked about this before in previous podcasts, where you can bring folks together, provide some common orientation, and some select times help activate programs like ones working that I'm aware of, working with university students to help, to get the benefits of them developing counter disinformation or disinformation programs and activities as part of their academic programs, or working with the entertainment industry to help our foreign partners build more capacity in getting those who have credibility to get their messages out over a multitude of platforms through the transmedia environment. I think that the psychological operations community, as Jeremy said, is small, but their ability to network within those networks and help inspire a common orientation and allow those relationships to metastasize only creates a very powerful alternative to those who compete with our shared interests. Jeremy, would you agree? Do you share similar thoughts? Over?
Yeah, I do, Austin. I think that, we're often challenged by our own bureaucracy within DoD. We have multiple echelons between the end users, the people who are doing the actual activities that we're talking about, and then those touch points out in industry, the touch points in other aspects of our own government. And so using the network is really, really important to us. And I can tell you what's different for me, being a PSYOP officer now as opposed to having been an engineer before, is having to work in these joint and strategic environments. And even here where I'm sitting at the brigade level, the Army will tell you to look 2 levels up, right? Seek to understand what your boss's boss wants you to do. I look 5 to 7 levels up every day. And I'm constantly scanning and talking with interagency partners and talking with partners within DoD. And again, some of these other think tanks and things like that. It's really important for us. And some of the things that DoD is doing in the space to try to pull and converge some of these capabilities, I think is going to be really helpful for helping us keep that network on track.
Jeremy, if I could, John, I just want to pull it one more thing. This is an important message to some of the IPA constituents that are not part of the Department of Defense. I think it's important, Jeremy, and you mentioned it, and you've been doing this even back in your time in the Office of Secretary of Defense, is that DoD is not trying to manage or control the entire effort. We're seeking ways how to contribute and how to be helpful and how to leverage the Department of Defense's unique capabilities to be as helpful as DoD can possibly be to the broader array of government organizations and other organizations that have a shared interest. In some cases, have their unique authorities to do the things they need to be doing, and that we're not in competition, that the DoD is not in competition with them, that they're actually one of their most loyal partners. Did you want to expand on that a little bit? It's important, I think, to the community of interest to understand.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that what we've found, because we've seen competition between DoD or within DoD over different things, turf battles over the years between different entities. And what we've found very clearly is that there's more than enough work to go around in the information environment. And so we're really very complementary of Department of State efforts. We're really complementary in a lot of cases based on our global special operations network, our indigenous partners that we're working with around the world. And so what we're seeking to do is kind of help create that synchronization, help foster that at echelon. So from our standpoint, with things that we're doing here, for instance, we know that we don't have the onus of synchronization of Department of Defense efforts on us, but we can help, and we can help facilitate that. And we do that routinely by talking with other partners who are in this space. But that's very important, because I think there's a lot of thoughts on, well, why is that entity doing this in this space? Well, it's not about ownership, right? This is about the whole team of national security.
Right, and I recommend to Cognitive Crucible and PSYWAR Podcast listeners to go back and listen to a recent podcast that we had with U.S. Army retired Colonel Mark Mitchell, who I think you probably know, Jeremy. He was he led the SOLIC office for a while, and he's got some constructive criticism to make about these cross-agency collaborations. But the discussion that you guys were just having, to me, I think whole of government effort and working out what does that mean exactly, so that the swim lanes are well understood, but continuing to advance that collaboration, which has come up over and over again as a critical component to being effective in prosecuting in the information environment. Would both of you agree with all of that?
Yeah, I think it's important. And it has to be, it's like a marriage. You got to work at it every day, as Jeremy pointed out, and resolve those, those equity concerns, because we've got, ultimately, we've got much more important work to proceed with. Correct, Jeremy?
Yeah, completely agree. And yes, I worked for Mr. Mitchell in SOLIC, and I did listen to that podcast, and I do completely agree with that stance.
One of the other points that Mark made, it was really just like a very brief mention, but he asserts that unlike the kinetic operations and developing equipment and capabilities for prosecuting kinetic fights, which can be very expensive. Conversely, information operations, we may find, are relatively inexpensive compared to kinetic. Do either of you have any thoughts about that, as far as the outlay of developing effective information operations capability at the strategic nation state level, the whole of government level?
I think it depends.
Yeah, that's probably.
I mean, you can think of the military in terms of where you have severe overmatch with things that you would find on the commercial side in society, right? Like, nobody in society is going to come near what we have for fires, because that's what the military does. We develop those tools. When you're looking at the information environment, keeping pace with what's going on with the evolution in the information environment, you're not going to find through your traditional cycle of acquisition that we have in the military, right? And so now when it comes to innovation, can you do things under innovation with techniques and tools that are cheap in that sense? Yes. But there's other things, other technologies that you have to rely on that are very much industry standard to be able to do what you need to do. So I think it just kind of depends on what you're talking about. Certainly information tools in the modern day can be very, very expensive.
And hence, and taking me back to the network of networks, those alliances and partnerships to be able to kind of shape or expand or accelerate some of our, the Department of Defense capabilities, but do that in tandem with, the execution of other people doing what they need to be doing, that for their own interest, which ultimately we share the outcome. We have a shared interest in the outcomes and the objectives. One thing, Jeremy, toward that end, in developing capability, you're helping lead an effort for the establishment of the Information Warfare Center, and on behalf of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, and that has a very important intent and a role, not only as serving the Army soft community, potentially the joint community, and certainly the Army cyber community, who's evolving and looking at bringing their cyber capabilities in a much broader space. General Fogarty's been very vocal about it. He's been a thought leader. And so your thoughts on that contribution, the IWC and what it is and its contribution to the broader efforts.
Yeah, thank you, Austin. I think this is a necessary step that is probably something that we should have taken years ago. So the creation of the Information Warfare Center, and what is it? The idea is essentially that we have something located within, the continental United States, not a deployed element, something that really is operating as an information warfare task force globally to get after adversaries, right? And as stated, it was in support, of Army Special Operations Forces, Joint Special Operations, the Joint Force as a whole, right? Combatant commands and theater special operations commands. And ultimately we see that as our joint interagency partners as well. And so, we really have a grand vision for this thing. We stood it up in the summer of 20. We hit what we'd consider to be initial operating capability in the August timeframe. But really what that means is getting that, the personnel build out right as we go forward. As I mentioned before, a no growth environment. So we're working to balance personnel between 4th Group and 8th Group to build this thing out over time and to bring in other information related capabilities. And a lot of us have experienced what an information warfare task force is like. We've seen some of those things downrange, and that's really where we do convergence of capabilities well. But then when you step back and look at how is DoD structured, when you're not in a wartime environment, we don't tend to do that well. You have different offices responsible for each capability within OSD, and then we say the locus of integration is at the combatant command. Well, that's difficult to do, right? So what the vision for this is, go ahead and build it, and then we will be able to get the authorities as they come, and we're working through that process.
That's really cool. Does the roadmap for the IWC include having liaison officers or personnel from outside the Army, maybe from the other services or even from other governmental agencies as part of the capability when it's fully stood up?
Yeah, we're really working on that pretty hard. And again, it comes down to what do you have the manpower for? So we're trying to partner very close with Army Cyber Command. I have an officer who's there who I've sent not as a liaison, but as a planner, right? Oftentimes liaisons, you don't really get much out of them if you're the hosting organization. No, my captain is there as a planner to help them. I have individuals who are with Cybercom, and we've had a captain from the MCIOC, the Marine Corps Information Operations Center, down with us, seeing what it's like for a couple months and seeing how we can tie them in better. I've had a lot of discussions with First Information Operations Command and how can we kind of lash that up a little bit better. So it's really, we're really trying to pull it together in that the right way in that sense. First Special Forces Command runs a bi-weekly meeting essentially, but where they've pulled in all these stakeholders since last summer. And that's been great because as we're working to build out the Information Warfare Center, we've had the stakeholders around the table. We've been able to find out through that process, do they have any kind of issues with what we're doing? Do they have any kind of recommendations, and kind of weave that in as we go forward? And that's been very useful. And then as we go to the next steps of operationalizing the capability, well, they're already around the table. They know what we're doing, and they can see how we can help them and how they can plug into this.
And Jeremy, for our foreign partners who maybe listen to this podcast or will listen to this podcast, our Five Eye partners and others who have shared interests in this space, as leading the IWC effort, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say as Special Operations Forces, that is exactly what we're here to do, right? The main purpose behind what we're looking at is being able to work with our indigenous partners through the network that we already have. Army Special Operations Forces globally deployed, lots of countries, lots of partners we've been working with for years, all at varying levels of their own maturity for capabilities in the information environment, and helping them and helping those combatant commanders respectively to be able to keep our adversaries off balance. So we're very much opening that aperture up as we go forward. Yes, Five Eye partners in France, and widening out as we can over time.
Austin, any other initiatives that you're aware of?
One being led by the Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security in partnership with the Office of Secretary of Defense, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and ASD Solic and the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and other organizations, as well as even the United States Central Command and others. The reestablishment of collaboration platform called Phoenix Challenge. The intent, what it used to be was the platform where we brought government and industry, academia, and our foreign partners together on a series of conferences and workshops to share ideas, to collaborate, to establish and maintain relationships, and help and look on the horizon for new technologies and capabilities, methods, and applications, or even look at challenges in our policies and our legal issues to compete in this environment. That effort had taken a bit of a hiatus over time, and now that's being reinvigorated and reestablished. And in April, we'll host the ARLIS, and as I said, in partnership with the host of folks from across DoD and others, and State Department will kick off the next Phoenix Challenge to do exactly what I was just talking about, to expand the network of networks, form that platform, the Switzerland of platforms where a private sector that doesn't normally deal with defense industry come in, and defense organizations to come in and share ideas and collaborate and work together. And then there'll be a subsequent series of workshops that'll specifically focus on key requirements and key capability and technology. So I'm excited about all that. That'll be followed. That event will be done in tandem with U.S. Central Command's effort to do a DoD-centric IO-related conference that they've done in the past. And again, bringing the community of interest together, creating platforms for collaboration integration. And I'm looking forward to see, how the IWC plays a critical role, important role in shaping the Phoenix Challenge agenda. And as we try and coalesce the broad community of interest. And Jeremy, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, but this is all contributes to the greater efforts that you guys are trying to also do at U.S. Special Operations Command, Army Special Operations Command.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, and it's certainly, it's been a long time since I was involved with Phoenix Challenge, and I think that's a great direction for it. So we're absolutely going to be seeing what we can do to inject ourselves into that process and have that understanding and draw tighter with the network.
Right. And Phoenix Challenge is on April 13th, and listeners can find out more information by following the link in the show notes or going to information-professionals.org and finding out more information.
And I just wanted to say, failed to mention it, IPA and all the IPA members and folks who are listening to this, they're a proud partner to help put this event on. And so members don't hesitate to volunteer to see how you can help in some way, because this is, as I said, it's an all-in proposition, and we look forward to the network of networks to grow. Over to you, John.
Thanks. So I'd like to wrap up, gentlemen, and zoom way back out to the big picture. So I'm, as the only Marine in the room here, amongst a couple of soldiers, I want to get your thoughts on the notion of competition and what's at stake. You may be aware that late last year, the Marine Corps published Marine Corps Doctrinal Pub 1-4, which is simply titled Competing. And actually, I am working with the Marine Corps right now to set up a discussion around this very pub. Anyway, it's a very short, consumable booklet, which is designed to be read and understood by all Marines. And so I think it's an important document, which is intended, partially at least, to reframe our thinking towards national security as a continuous competition. I'd love to conclude and get both of your thoughts on the notion of the struggle that we find ourselves in as a continuous competition, and basically take that in whatever direction you'd like to go and talk about what's at stake here. Why are we doing this? Why is this a focus of effort right now?
So I think this is important, because this is a mindset shift. Certainly within the department, we found that through that last published national security strategy. And it wasn't that competition was anything new. It's the realization that competition has continued to exist, but now it's back at the forefront. And why is that? Right. And a lot of that comes down to the proliferation of technologies, the idea that borders are very easily surmountable. Right. And now you have these adversaries and these countries who are out there who are extending their influence, and maybe not for the best purposes. And so it's just more and more evident that we need to be in these spaces. We need to be doing what we as Americans do, which is, push out values that treat everybody with dignity and respect, that we're looking to take care of individuals, and it's just important in that sense, and it's important for our national security, as we've seen. And so this is an important thing, and turning the DoD in this space takes time, and we've seen that right along. Now, national security strategy is not just for DoD, and so we've seen the same kind of thing in the State Department, right? And is DoD turning faster than the State Department in this space? Not really sure. But our nexus to this thing from a special operations standpoint is, yes, there's competition, and also there's this irregular warfare aspect that's salient to competition, and that's what we're driving at here, helping Indigenous partners be able to staunch some of these other nefarious actors in their spaces.
Couldn't agree more. I would tell you, from my perspective, I look toward the adversaries. Our near peer and others competition have prioritized competition in the information environment as their best opportunity for overmatch against the United States and its interests. And those threats are not on the horizon. They exist now. We've seen it. The threats to our political, our democracy, threats to our financial institutions, our infrastructure, threats to the very nature of our relationships overseas and even internally. So our adversaries and those who have interests that challenge ours, use the information environment as their platform, their avenues of approach against our interests. So if we're going to compete in this space, we have to be as organized and as capable and as unified as we possibly can to be able to thwart these challenges that come across not just the military space, but across every one of the political, diplomatic information, all across the spectrum of conflict and interaction. And in the past, we have not prioritized the information components because it's so hard to feel, touch, taste, and smell the effects of our efforts. I will tell you, we as a country are feeling we're tasting and seeing and feeling the effects of what our adversaries are doing to us in this space. So I think our ability to organize and be adaptable and compete in this space is a paramount to our national security, my view.
All right. And with that, Colonel Jeremy Mushtare and Mr. Austin Branch, thank you so much for being on the Cognitive Crucible. And Jeremy, to you and your soldiers, Godspeed as you do great work on behalf of America.
Hey, John, thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity and the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, John.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.